welcome to this next tutorial in Unity. This one's going to be a special one. This is an introduction to augmented reality, or AR. In Unity, you've probably seen the term XR. XR is an encompassment of multiple alternate reality systems. Augmented reality is one of them. Virtual reality is another. Mixed reality is another one. And in a future tutorial, we'll jump into those other two. But for today, we're going to focus on augmented reality. So this is a fun one. This is a fun little exercise we're going to do today. In the final product, you're going to see that we're going to move our camera around. We'll have a little placement indicator, and we're going to click on that little placement indicator and have one of the characters from Monkey Kiss and Donkey 2 and Code Llama up here, Ion. And so it'll be a lot of fun. We're gonna have a lot of fun with this project here. So first of all, we need to create a new project, and I must warn you, before attempting anything, if you're intending to build for Android, especially if you're intending to build for Android, there's a lot of pain and suffering going into trying to build for Android. It took me a while, a lot of research, a lot of redoing my installations, not uninstalling, but just it was just such a horrible experience to get things working for Android, because the newest Unity AR plugins seem to break a lot of things, in my opinion. And so I had to do a lot of major updating to different things. So first off, as you can see from the screen here, we're going to use Unity 2019.4.15. So that's the first thing. You need to update either 2020.1 or 2019.4 to .15. Now, that fixes a bug that comes up because you also need to update to Android SDK 11. And I'm going to drag over my SDK manager. So you can see here, Android 11, it needs to be installed. Okay, so you need Android 11 for this. I mean, I'm targeting 9 because my phone is a 9 right now, and that's okay. It'll work fine. But in order to get things working, I found I had to update everything to Android 11, which leads us to another discussion. Another thing that pops up with Android, and that is you need to upgrade your build Gradle. And in fact, Google gives full instructions on how to build with Android 11 for Unity, and so they have a full web page here. They're saying Android Gradle plugin 3.6 is sufficient. I disagree. I had to grab the latest and greatest, which was Gradle 5.6.4. Now, what's interesting, and we'll get to this in a moment when we're actually building for this. So you'll notice that you need to specify in your preferences Gradle, your path to Gradle 5.6.4. So you have to find out where it gets installed. We're going to go through these steps today because we had to do that. Another thing, we're going to have to edit our main Gradle and launcher Gradle files and basically copy and paste what's here at the top of those files. Now, I mentioned Gradle 5.6.4, but you notice that the line here specifies Gradle 3.6.0, and I foolishly thought, okay, well, this should actually read 5.6.4. And so for the longest time, it still would not build. Then I just, from dumb luck, switched this to 3.6.0, and everything started working. So leave this as is, and I'll mention this when we get to it. Don't change it. Just leave it as 3.6.0. All right. So there's all these steps for 2019.4 and 2020.1. All right. So we're going to be using Android 11, and that the third dependency, of course, is Gradle 5.6.4. So upgrading that as well. So there's a lot of upgrading you should do in advance before actually building for Android. And so now let's get into building our project. So we have here our Unity Hub. We're going to say 2019.4.15. So you got to upgrade to that if you don't have it. And I'm going to call this M11, so module 11, and we'll call it intro to AR, and we'll give it a home. Okay, now that we have our project open here, first thing I want to do is I want to rename our sample scene to game scene. I just like it better. So we'll go to rename. Okay, and we'll just let it reload. Okay. All right. I'll just resize a few things here. Okay, now that I'm ready to go. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to take a bit of a different approach to building this time around, is that we're going to start with configuring iOS and Android. So we're going to File, Build Settings. First thing I want to do is I want to add my open scene. It's the only scene we're going to have in this game, so might as well add it. I'm going to switch to iOS first. We'll build for iOS after. We'll build for Android first, but let's get the settings for iOS out of the way. Now, there's a few settings that we have to mark here in iOS. Okay, so it should take a moment or so to transfer over. All right, so we see that iOS has finally converted over. Well, the project's finally converted to iOS. Let's go to player settings. All right, I'm going to stretch this out. Now let's start with, actually no, we'll come back to XR plugin management after, because we still have to install the XR plugin, which we'll get to. We'll come back to these settings. Let's go back to player settings. And what we want to do is we need to do 3 settings here, which is starting in other settings. Let's give this thing a name. Let's call it com.something.m11 intro to VR or AR. All right, give it some versions and build numbers. All right, so do that. It's important to do that. I've noticed that actually burns me if I don't do that. So scripting backend IL2CPP, I'm going to switch it to .NET 4. All right, and scrolling down, minimum iOS is 11, not 10. So let's do 11. All right, requires ARKit support. Yes, we need ARKit support, which jumps us back up to camera usage description. Put in a message. It populated with something like required for augmented reality support. So sure, good enough. So, and last thing is architecture. My computer's thinking a little bit. There we go. Oh, I think I just did something. And yeah, I accidentally unchecked optimize mesh data. Let's put that back in. And finally, we define the architecture and set that, which most likely is... Sometimes when things are just right in front of you, they're not really right in front of you. So architecture. Universal, we're going to do only ARM64 for this. ARM32 or ARM, aka ARM7, is not supported for AR processing. So these are the main settings, and we're not building for iOS yet. We're going to build for it second. Now let's switch over to Android and do a switch platform. Now, there's a fair number of settings in Android that we have to switch over. And so now we're making sure we're under Android settings. I'm going to change again to be the same package name. All right. Version 1, yeah, build 1's good. Now, minimum API is 7 for Android. Target API, you can do automatic. Android 11 is what I'm going to target. All right. This is where you run into a lot of problems, and this is why I had to upgrade to .15 for Unity and upgrade my build Gradle and so on, because it wouldn't read this. It would just say API 30. If it says API 30 and not Android 11, it's not going to work. It's not going to build for Android 11. Okay, so you need to do the settings you need to do for this. So all right, scripting backend will be IL2CPP. .NET 4. Okay. Uncheck ARM7 and check ARM64. Okay, and we'll scroll up to, here we go, graphics APIs. Vulkan is not supported, so we got to remove Vulkan. And finally, multi-threaded rendering. We're going to uncheck that once it's done its thinking here. So it's done thinking. Let's uncheck multi-threaded rendering. Or is it done thinking? It's still thinking. Let's see. There we go. Unchecking multi-threaded rendering. And that's it for settings for now. We'll come back and modify a few more settings. But now we can close this. We've got our game scene. Let's close this up. Now the next step is to go to Package Manager. So we're going to open Window and go to Package Manager. All right. Now we should also set View Preview Packages. So once it's done loading, switch Advanced to Show Preview Packages. Okay, so it's going to do some thinking. Now let's scroll up to where we see AR. Now there's AR Foundation, AR Subsystem, ARCore XR plugin, ARKit Face Tracking, ARKit XR plugin. We want all four. So I'll start with AR Foundation and hit install. Now you'll notice that it installed AR Foundation and AR Subsystem at the same time. But if I expand AR Foundation and I click on, I notice that there's a 4.1.1 and it says update to 4.1.1. So we're going to do the update as well. If it automatically went to 4.1.1, great. You don't have to do this. But if it didn't and it only showed you 2.1.10, then upgrade to 4.1.1. So it's doing its thinking. Okay, so it updated to 4.1.1. AR Subsystem, we'll just double check, is up to date to 4.1.1. Okay, let's look at ARCore XR plugin. That's what we need for Android. Actually, I'm going to expand. I'm going to see if I can go straight to 4.1.1 instead of clicking on the 2.1.12. So if I highlight 4.1.1 there, hit install, it's going to do the installation of the ARCore XR plugin. So what this plugin is, so first off, AR Foundation, AR Subsystem, they are basically the core packages, the core APIs, the classes, and so on that are used for just doing your AR work in Unity. So being able to have an AR camera, have some AR ray casting, plane detection, like detecting a floor, detecting a surface, and so on. That's AR Foundation, AR Subsystem. AR XR Core plugin, ARCore XR plugin, is the plugin that interacts with ARCore, Android's actual library for AR. Okay, and then since we're talking about all these plugins here, so we got below it ARKit Face Tracking and ARKit XR plugin. So ARKit XR plugin is the same idea as ARCore XR plugin, but it's for iOS. So it's ARKit XR plugin will interact with ARKit iOS's package for AR on iPhones and iPads. And finally, ARKit Face Tracking is also for iOS. It interacts with the face tracking, face detection functionality that's built into iOS. All right, so now you understand what the 5 packages are all about. In earlier versions, they only had 3 packages. They only had AR Foundation, ARCore XR plugin, and ARKit XR plugin. Now you're dealing with the latest and greatest here. There's now 5 packages here. All right, so we'll just wait and see this thing finish installing. Okay, so now that ARCore is done, let's expand the last 2. I'm going to start with the last one, ARKit XR plugin. 411, hit install. All right, and finally, ARKit face tracking finally. So we'll click on the 411 for ARKit face tracking, hit install, and let it do its thing. All right, looks like we have all the packages we need installed. Now, we've done a lot of configuration, but we haven't done anything yet. Now let's actually do something. So I'm gonna kill this off. Let's start by just trying to get things up and running. All right. What I mean by that is let's just stick a very simple cube on the screen and let's see how it interacts in the AR world. So first off, let's expand our game scene. Let's get the AR objects into our scene. So I'm gonna go to game object. You'll notice that XR is now an option for you. So I'm gonna say XR. We need AR session. So we're adding AR session. We're gonna add one more. All right, go to XR, AR session origin. Now, let's expand that. If I expand AR session origin, you notice that there's an AR camera built into it, which means that we do not need our main camera anymore. So I'm gonna hit main camera and I'm gonna delete it. Okay. Now, if I go to AR camera, and I go to the inspector, we'll just tag it as main camera. So now our AR camera is our main camera. All right. Now, let's throw a cube into the game. So I'm going to go to game object, 3D object, cube. All right. Now it's thrown a cube. Let's put it visible to our camera so we can actually see it here. But I should also note that in our space here, the cube is too big. We actually have to scale it down. I'm going to scale it down to 0.1, 0.1, 0.1. And that's because one square, so if I zoom in further, one square here represents a meter. And a meter is too big. So we want to scale it down to be so we can see the remaining area of our camera. So I did 0.1, 0.1, 0.1. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and move it to be in front of the camera. So let's see here, put it about there, go to our camera, so you can see it there. Maybe I'll move it back a bit. Oops, not the camera, the cube. All right, still too far away. I want it to be closer. All right, well, much better. So we have a cube there. All right, let's build this thing and see how it looks in the AR world. All right, but before we do that, we need to go back to project settings. I said we had to do a couple of project settings before we move into things. Now you notice that XR plugin management has been expanded. All right, to include ARCore and ARKit. All right, so I'm click on XR plugin management, initialize XR on startup, plugin provider will be ARCore. Now let's click on ARCore. It should say required. Okay, now I want to switch to iOS for a sec because I don't want to forget. And I want to do the same thing, plugin provider ARKit. And just double check ARKit is required. You could put face tracking down. We're not going to get into that today, so I'll leave it unchecked. But okay, so all of our settings are now done. Okay, so now let's build this thing. So let's do a Control S to save our project. Now we'll go to File, Build Settings, and choose your device, build and run. And I'm going to call it test.apk for lack of a better name. And let's go. Okay, so this was expected. This is actually the main reason why building for Android is a lot of pain and suffering. Manifest merger failed with multiple errors. See logs, see the console for details. I already kind of know what it's going to say. It's going to complain about some error package for key. Which is somewhere in this pile of goulash. All right. So what we're going to do is we actually have to make another change, which I mentioned earlier at the beginning, but we didn't do it. So I'm going to clear all this out. And we'll go to player. We're under Android still. And we're going to go to actually publishing settings. There it is. So like in the instructions that we saw on the website, we need to check off main Gradle template and launch your Gradle template. Okay, now it'll actually generate these two files and these locations. So launcher Gradle template.gradle, main template Gradle.gradle. And so if we look in our project, we'll see plugins, Android, and we see these two files. All right. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to open these in Visual Studio to edit them. But double clicking on it doesn't exactly do that for me. So I am going to start by right clicking and going to open with. And we should have this Microsoft Visual Studio version selector. I'm not gonna say always. Notepad, WordPad, I don't trust those. Notepad definitely does not deal with line breaks properly, so you don't want to do that. So Visual Studio seems to be the safest bet for loading this. All right. So it says here, we're going to remove this comment because it says generate by Unity. Remove this comment to prevent overwriting when exporting again. I'm going to uncheck that. And it also said in the instructions, I'm going to call up the website again. This is the website. Gotta find. So it says remove that comment. And it also says copy and paste this at the very top of the file. All right, so I'll make sure it's all there. Control C to copy. Control V to paste. Hit save. Leave that as 360, like I said before, even though we're using 564. Now, same thing for main template.gradle. Open with. Version Visual Studio Selector. Hit OK. It's going to automatically load in 2019 again for me. Unfortunately, in a separate one, but that's okay. I'm going to remove its comment, paste as well, and save that, and try again. Right, so build settings, and build and run. All right, and eventually what you'll see is you'll see a cube in the middle of the screen, and as you move around your camera, you'll find that you can actually get the different perspectives of the cube. It's as if it's real, but when you look in front of you, it's not there. It's actually so cool, like just to be able to see like this little object right in front of you. All right, now that we've seen a simple cube in action on our in our world there, it was pretty cool to see. We can walk around it. Now let's actually take it a step further and let's put a placeholder, a place mark in front of it. So place marks are useful for detecting surfaces and indicating to the user, hey, this is a floor, this is a wall, this is a table, you know. And then we're going to take the final step and put an object in place of it. So what we're going to do is we are going to, well, I'm going to keep my cube in play for now. What we're going to do is we're going to add an empty game object. And I'm going to call this I'm going to rename it, I guess, in the inspector. We're going to call it placement. All right. And then what we're going to do as well is we're going to add another 3D game object, but this time we're going to add a quad. All right. And this quad will be rotated on the x-axis by 90 degrees. Okay. And we'll make it 0 0.2, 0 0.2, 0 0.2. All right. And the Y level of it will need to be adjusted. Actually, well, let's see, Y at 0 is fine. It's Z. Well, first off, let's drag it inside the placement. It's going to be a sub-object of placement. There we go, 0, 0, 0. All right, so that looks good. Okay, and it's flat on the ground. I'm going to hide cube. We don't need cube anymore. You can see behind the shadow there, there's our little quad there. We're going to replace it with an image. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an image to my project. So I'm going to add a new folder. I'm going to call it textures. Inside textures, I'm going to bring in an image. I already have the Code Llama logo. I'm going to use that. All right, and I'm going to bring this into my project. I'm just going to copy the file over from another part of my hard drive. Okay, so there it is, called Code Llama logo.png. I'm just going to pull this away and let it think. There we go. Now, in terms of configuration, first off, we're going to bring it up in settings. Now, I don't really need to do this because this is a simple square, but I'm pretty sure you're probably going to try this out eventually with a PNG file that has a transparent background, like an arrow or something. So what you want to do is you want to set alpha is transparency. I'm going to do it anyway, and I'll hit apply. I'm not going to change anything else. And there we go. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to create a material for this logo, this texture. So I'm going to add a new material. There it is. I'm going to call it placement. All right. Now its shader needs to be unlit, transparent. Okay, so unlit, transparent. Then what you can do is you can drag your logo into it. Okay, now we have our material. I'm going to bring the quad closer. It's going to drag my material onto the quad. All right, and so now I have my logo there. Okay, so now we need to visit or revisit AR session origin. Make some modifications there. So if I click on AR session origin, it only has the AR session origin script. We actually need 2 more components. So I click on component. We need AR raycast manager. And we also need AR plane manager. We need both of these. Okay. Now, in terms of what to drag over, well, raycast prefab is simply your quad, and plane prefab is also your quad. Okay. So now AR session origin is configured. So you hit Control S to save what we have so far. Now we need to create a new script. So I'm going to create a new folder in my project called scripts. And inside of it, I'm going to add a new C# script. And we'll call it tap placement. Now let's load this inside Visual Studio, and we'll write some code to support this. All right, so first thing we'll do, we're going to add a couple of usings. So we're going to say using Unity engine.xr.ar foundation. Then the second using is going to be using Unity engine.experimental.xr. All right, so we have two usings that we're going to bring in. Now let's add some variables. Okay, so first thing we're going to do, we're going to define a public, because we're going to connect to it, game object, placement indicator. Now the second one is a public game object. I'm going to call it object to place. We're going to do this later. This will be our final step. We're going to use this second game object to place a new object where we tap on the placement indicator. But since we're here, let's just add it anyway. Let's add our remaining variables. So we're going to say private AR session origin, call it AR origin, and private AR raycast manager, call it AR raycast manager. All right, private pose equals, or call it pose placement. And private bool valid pose placement equals false. So if there's no place to, if there's no surface to latch onto, then we want to hide our placement indicator. So we're going to use this boolean to do that. And pose placement will basically manage our orientation and location for our placement indicator. So first thing, let's start into start. And we're going to say AR origin is equal to find object of type AR session origin. Okay, so AR session origin. Second will be AR raycast manager is equal to find object of type. Call it AR raycast manager. All right. Now inside update, we're going to start with calling a method called update placement. Now, of course, this doesn't exist, so let's let Visual Studio auto generate it for us. All right. And it's going to throw, let's remove the throw. And replace it with actual code. So first thing, we're going to set up a location where we want to put the placement indicator, which is going to be dead center in our screen. So we're going to say var screen center equals camera dot current dot viewport to screen point, and this will just be a new vector3 of 0.5f, 0.5f. So halfway x, halfway y, dead center. Now we need another variable. This variable is called hits. So we're going to say var hits. This is, it's going to be an empty list for now. So I'll explain in a sec what it is. New list of AR raycast hits. Okay, so this is essentially to retrieve hits on the screen. A hit is a plane that a placement can be placed on. All right, so that's the idea, is that hits will appear, hits will be saved anytime we find a surface, a floor, a plane, a tabletop, whatever we can place our placement indicator on. Now it's an empty list right now, so let's go and see if we can find something by saying AR raycast manager dot raycast. Oops. Sometimes typing can be an unfriendly thing. So AR raycast manager dot raycast, and open it up. We're going to pass in screen center. We'll pass in our hits array. And then finally, what are we looking for? Unity engine dot xr dot ar subsystems dot trackable type dot planes. Look for planes and save them inside our hits array. Now, if there's anything to bring back, let's update our Boolean. So we'll say valid placement pose equals hits.count greater than 0. And check to see if hits.count is greater than 0, the length is greater than 0. Valid pose placement is true, otherwise it's false. So now, assuming it's true, let's go ahead and say if valid pose placement. Now we're going to basically say pose placement is equal to hits of 0 dot pose. Now we need the camera orientation, because we're going to update that right now. Camera position, camera orientation. So we're going to say var camera forward equals camera dot current dot transform dot forward. So this is good enough on its own. This will place the placement indicator on the screen. Everything after this line is to fix the orientation, because it's not going to look very proper. All right, so we're going to add a few extra lines of code to actually orient the placement indicator to still continually face us, and to point in the direction of the camera of which way we're looking. So it's I guess gravy on the train essentially. So we say camera forward. Now we're going to say var camera bearing is equal to new vector 3 for camera forward dot x, 0 for y, and camera forward dot z. Okay, we don't care about the height or the y. Finally, pose placement dot rotation is a quaternion dot look rotation for camera bearing. All right. Now the second method we need inside update is called update placement pose. Of course, it doesn't exist. Let's let Visual Studio generate it for us. There it says throws not implemented exception, which we're going to correct. And so now in this method, what we're going to do is we're going to, based on finding a plane to display this indicator on, we will make the placement indicator visible if there's a plane to display it on, or invisible if there's nothing to display on. So we're going to say if valid pose placement, so hits were found, right? Then we're going to say placement indicator dot set active to true, and we're also going to orient it properly. So we're going to say placement indicator dot transform dot set position and rotation to be pose placement dot position and pose placement dot rotation. Otherwise, We're going to say placement indicator dot set active to false. So we don't want to see it. If there's nothing to display it on, don't need to see it. All right, let's save this file. And we're going to go back to the editor. And it'll update and refresh. Now, what we need to do is add a empty game object once it's done thinking. Okay, so now let's add an empty object. So create empty. I'm going to call it tap placement manager. And add a component, add this new tap placement script. It's going to say placement indicator. So what we're going to do is we're going to drag our quad. And object to place, we can leave it as none for now. We're not using it at all. So it shouldn't crash. If it does, we'll jump ahead and add our object in a moment. But for now, let's just save and let's give it a run. We can just do a build and run. We don't need to go build settings anymore. All right, and so when you run this, finally, you should see the CodeLlama logo indicator or whatever graphic you're using. You'll see different sizes, different placements. You know, as you move closer to a surface, as you move away from a surface, as you rotate, you'll see different. You'll see it follow and track you. All right. So now that we have our placement indicator up and running, you may have noticed in the video there that it was showing multiple placement indicators because, of course, my floor isn't the greatest. It has those planks, so you can see that there's multiple possible surfaces going on. So it was actually displaying multiple possible placement indicators. But in a nutshell, it's working. It's actually displaying a placement indicator for us to track. So now the last step is we're going to set it up so that when you click on the placement indicator, it displays a 3D object. Okay, so I'm going to take one of the characters from my game, Monkey Kiss and Donkey 2 and CodeLlama, the two separate games. They use the same characters, and I'm going to bring them in. So I'm going to take one of my characters. So I've got here, what we're going to do is we're going to create a new folder. And I'm going to call this folder robot, for lack of a better name. All right. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring my characters in. So first off, let's do a show and explore. All right. And we enter robot there. And I'll just copy the files over. Okay, and so we see them there. Now I'll just take this away, and we should see project thinking as it imports these new assets. Okay, so he's been so this character is named Ion. It's a lion, and he's been brought in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add Ion to my project. He's pretty massive, so I'm going to scale him down to 0.2, 0.2, 0.2. All right. He might still be massive. Let's actually drop him down to 0.1. 0.1. Now remember, these squares represent a large distance in the real world. So let's see here. If I bring him in, He's still gonna look pretty huge, but you know what? I think it'll be good enough for our application today. Now, I have him here. I don't want him to be in the middle of my placement indicator, so I'm actually gonna move him off to a far obscure area. I like doing this because what I can do is I can actually bring my game objects in. This little technique I do is I bring my game objects in, I scale them down to the size I want, and then I set them off to be at 999,999,999. And what I do in Code Llama is I do this with a lot of NPCs, and then what I do is I do some cinematics, some cinemachines, so that in the game when I want my character to talk to the NPC, it actually zooms into a camera view of the character in a far off distance, but this still looks like it's talking like right in front. So it's a little neat trick I like doing, and I get all the things I want out of it. Okay, so we have here Ion. I'm going to click on Tap Placement Manager, Object to Place. We're just going to drag him over. We're going to hit Save. Now our last little bit of code modification, and then we're ready to go. So now we're going to jump back to our script here, and we've already defined object to place. All right, so now we're ready to just go ahead and add this ability to click on the placement indicator and have him appear. So click on update there, add a little space there. I'm going to say if valid pose placement and input.touchCount is greater than 0, and input.getTouch of 0 dot phase equals touch phase dot began. If it has, we're going to call a method called place object. Of course, it hasn't been created yet, so I'm just going to tap, generate it, and we'll replace it with instantiate object to place pose placement dot position pose placement dot rotation. All right, and that's all. Now we'll just save our script, and we'll go ahead and run this thing. So let it refresh. We're basically done with anything else we need to do here. So after it's refreshing, we're just going to do a build and run. All right, and so what you should see now is your Code Llama logo or your texture for your posement placement. You tap on it, and you should see Ion. In my case, or your 3D object. In my case, it's pretty big, and as it detects more planes, you can tap more and add more of them, right? And then you can move away, move back. You can do so many different things, and you'll see that that you can place 3D objects wherever you want. All right. And so there you have it. You have now a fully functioning AR application. All right. And now you can take it a step further, play with it. Hey, maybe you'll build the next Pokemon Go. Now, I did promise some work on iOS. If you've been following along, hopefully you've been building an iOS along with me, as opposed to Android. But just in case if you're following along and you're using an Android device and you want to do for iOS, well, the easiest thing to do is just go to your build settings, and you're going to switch over to iOS, hit switch platform, and let it think. It'll do a re-import. It might take a bit longer than before. All right, now that it's re-imported the project, we're just going to do a build. So I'm just going to create a new folder, call it iOS build. Now, of course, if you're using a Mac, you don't go through these loops and hurdles to do that. Of course, you can just do a build and run directly. But because I'm using Windows, I don't want to move my project over to a Mac. Just simply build the project, export the project, copy it over to Xcode, build it, and run it there.